you please take your seats? It's now 2 minutes past 3:20, so we're ready to start towards the final segment of today's conference. Thank you very much for those of you who are back in the room. So in the second part of the panel discussion today, we're going to talk about just transitions and particularly how can renewable energy contribute towards these. And it's actually a great joy and privilege to introduce one of my more interesting SPRU colleagues, Dr. Max Lacey-Barnacle. He's a research fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. And his work is within the area of energy justice, community wealth building, and democratizing low-carbon energy transitions. So his professional and academic work have explored the interface between climate change policy, inequality, equity, and justice. So without much delay, Max, please, it's time for your presentation.
Great, thank you. And apologies for my ridiculous surname. That's a combination of my mum and dad agreeing to go half and half, if any of you are wondering what on earth Lacey-Barnacle means. Thanks very much for inviting an academic and a researcher down to present at this conference today. I'm going to be bringing a social science perspective on energy transitions and solar deployment, and I'm going to be drawing on some qualitative research that we've conducted at the University of Sussex as part of a ROLES project, a project called ROLES, sorry. So let me give you a brief overview of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I'm going to be presenting the concept of a just transition, which I think has been somewhat alluded to today in discussion when we talk about fairness and we talk about equity, but I'm going to try and define it and kind of give some kind of theoretical grounding around what it actually means, and also why it's important, why we should talk about a just transition. Then I'm going to talk about a research project happening at the University of Sussex called the ROLES project, which is going from 2020 to 2023. And then I'll talk a bit about our data collection in Brighton. And what we did is went and talked to residents around the city about their solar installations. So I'll talk very briefly about some of the results and analysis, and then I will extrapolate what I think are the most important themes that came from our analysis of that interview data. And I will then offer some concluding thoughts on what I think should be done to move forward, some policy recommendations, and then I'm going to give a very quick plug to a local Green New Deal project, which is happening at Sussex, which Riley is part of as well, and Julia over there, and just talk a little bit about that and hopefully garner some interest in that project before the Q&A. So, a just transition. What is a just transition? Well, as ever in academia, it's incredibly contested. It's a definition that varies quite considerably, often contextually and regionally specific. So, for example, what a just transition means in Brighton and Hove may differ quite wildly to what it means in Scotland, for example. And also, what I'd like to emphasize here, being around policymakers and people working for government, is that it really is a concept that has become part of mainstream policy discourse. As we see in Scotland with the Just Transition Commission, globally, we see the New Zealand Just Transition Unit. In Canada, we see a Just Transition Task Force. And of course, at the EU level, we have the Just Transition Mechanism. So it is a concept that I thought I'd hear a bit more earlier today, but I think it's alluded to quite a lot in our discussions. So I'm not going to say it's just varied and there's no definition. I'm going to try and draw on some academic literature to define it. So the authors Wang and Low, publishing in a journal called Energy Research and Social Science, offered a really broad conceptual review of what a just transition means, and they drew on global literature over the last 5 years. And through this literature review, they understood just transition as a labor-oriented concept, so the kind of classical definition, which is what occurs when we put fossil fuel infrastructure and industries into decline, when they're decommissioned, and what happens to those workers, those laborers. And I think here we're really interested in issues of justice in the building and the construction of a new low-carbon economy. And that's what I'd like to kind of advance today, is that understanding of a just transition. We also have just transition as an integrated framework for justice. So drawing on principles like distributional justice, who gets economic benefits, and procedural justice, who is involved in decision-making. We also have just transition as a theory of socio-technical transition, which is a very academic phrase, drawing on concepts like transition management or the multi-level perspective. Just transition as a governance strategy, which I think will be very relevant to many of you working in local government today. And just transition as public perception. So what do the public think when they hear just transition, and what does it mean to them? So here I'm really not going to try and dive into all five, but I'm going to emphasize just transition as a framework for justice and as a governance strategy. But why is it important? Why am I standing here talking about this today? Why is it relevant to policymakers? Well, calls for a equitable global green recovery have really emerged, for example, from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and we are slowly, fingers crossed, entering the era of a post-COVID recovery, and inequality has been exacerbated, and low-carbon transitions are really critical, as we all know, in coming decades. The Carbon Trust, one of my favorite UK organisations, I didn't work for them, I actually used to work for the Energy Saving Trust, but I really like this definition of a just transition, where they say its aim should be to create a more equal society whilst still moving towards a decarbonised future, where policymakers acknowledge the different experiences of exclusion from the benefits of the transition and prioritise diverse local engagement. The costs borne by vulnerable groups and communities could be minimised. To truly be a just transition, it must also be inclusive. So I think, for me, in my academic research and in responses to policy consultations, all the outreach work we do, this is something I really kind of take forward, and I think this is something that's very relevant for policymakers, and I hope is the type of definition that will be taken forward. So ROLS, what is it and what are we doing? Well, it stands for Responsive Organising for Low Emission Societies, and it seeks to identify how European city regions can accelerate the decarbonisation of energy systems through the digitalisation of energy infrastructure. And what we are trying to emphasise is how this happens in ways that also create societal benefits, right? Not this kind of techno-optimist outlook where incredible innovations are occurring, but also how those innovations benefit society. Our data collection is taking place across Europe, so in Norway, in Bergen, Italy, Trento, and in the UK, in Brighton. And specifically in Brighton, we're looking at solar PV. And some of the key concepts that emerge, or are actually really important to this concept, are the idea of a just transition and also socially inclusive innovation. So, what did we do? We interviewed a lot of you here in our expert interview phase, and myself and Adrian Smith, who sat over there. And what we did from those very useful and helpful interviews, thank you very much, everyone sat here that we interviewed, we used those to feed into our community interviews, where we went out and we spoke to people in Brighton. So in one of our expert interviews, we came across the Housing Revenue Account Solar PV Distribution Programme, and this is where the council, Brighton and Hove City Council, distributes solar to council housing homes. And in the conversations that we had in our expert interviews, we found that there were 4 areas that were targeted in Brighton. So Whitehawk, Coldene, Bevendine, and Hangleton and Knoll. So once we found this out, we went and got ethical approval. I put my Sussex lanyard on, and I went out and I knocked on a lot of doors. Talking of door knocking earlier, that is something that I was directly engaged in. And myself and another academic from the University of Sussex, Professor Benjamin Sovacool, we knocked on the doors of over 100 homes. So our response rate we were happy with, but we got about 24 respondents, which I know in the context of the Brighton population isn't that many, but for us it was a response rate we were really happy with. So what did we do, in case anyone's interested in how we recruited people? We put together a leaflet, and it offered a £30 voucher to participants, and we explained the entire premise of the project. And then when we'd secured interviews with participants, we asked them a series of questions, such as how has your solar performed? Can you tell me a bit about the history, the installation? And we asked about digital technologies, what role they play. And then we also wanted to get participants' views on what groups they felt were excluded from solar programs and what they felt that government, local government and policymakers could do to really help promote more socially inclusive approaches. So where did we get them? Well, we tried our best to get them from the 4 areas that I mentioned. So we had a total of 24 interviews, as I said, and this is broken down into 6 from Whitehawk, 6 from Coldene, 4 from Bevendine, 5 from Hangleton and Knoll, and 3 from Hove. And who did we interview? So the majority were homeowners, 16, and the rest were either council housing tenants, which was 5, or renting in the private sector, which was 3. And we had a roughly even split between genders, with 13 male and 11 female participants. So who had solar and how was this financed/owned? So the majority of homes had solar. We also approached homes that were next to solar because we were also looking at digital innovations, and while the rest did not, so that's 5. So 10 of these households, their PV installations were self-financed, 5 owned and managed by the council, and then the remaining 4, which is where we realize ownership is very complicated, was divided between ownership by a private company, already installed before the purchase of the house, or delivered through the council's Solar Together scheme. And because we were looking at digital innovation and digital technology adoption, we wanted to ask what was going on in this space. So the majority displayed no engagement with digital technologies, which was 12, and a small minority considered digital technologies, and the rest were actively engaged. So it's quite unclear as to it's clear there's definitely not a majority of people engaging in digital technology experimentation. And of the 19 homes that had solar installed, less than half were actively engaged in digital technologies. So that's a kind of a cursory sort of demographic analysis, and it's down to things like ownership and digital technology engagement. When we transcribed the interviews and we were able to have a closer look at the data, what were the kind of things that we really felt that stuck out? And through a thematic analysis of this data, we came up with 5 different themes. So I'm not going to talk about all of them today because there's 5 and it's quite a lot to talk about. But 3 I think really stand out. So income and housing divides. This is something that I think permeates throughout the rest of the data that we collected and is really important. So the inequalities between council tenant and homeowner experiences. Technological skepticism towards smart meters and issues around trust and lack of engagement. Knowledge and awareness, which has been alluded to earlier today, which is just so important. The need for education and simple communication. Technical issues were prominent, but I'm not going to be expanding on that today. And the last one, which I think is really important, is the left behind and non-adopters. So this is participants' thoughts on widening inclusion. I'm only going to briefly dive into what they've said, but I'm going to draw on some data nonetheless. So, income and housing divides. When we think about the inequalities between council tenant and homeowner experiences, what did we see? Well, one council tenant that was a pensioner living in a council house on her own, had never had the internet and does not use the internet, stated that the solar installed has made a difference to her energy bills and really helped reduce costs, and felt as though all council residents should have solar PV, drawing on this positive experience. Now, this is in strong contrast to a homeowner in Coldene who said, we get about, £800 a year of income from what we generate, and so on that basis, it would pay for itself in something under 10 years. We could afford the costs. So they installed in the era of high fits and were able to benefit from both the import and export tariff. The second theme that I think is important to kind of relay today is knowledge and awareness, and how important it is to have education and simple communication around solar PV deployment that is occurring in Brighton and elsewhere. One council tenant from Whitehawk said that they look up their solar PV installation all the time. They don't really know how it works, who installed it, how old they are, or anything like that. And this is in incredibly strong contrast, again, to the homeowners who said, for example, someone in Coldene, from an environmental point of view, it was necessary, and anything that helps the planet. And then people talking about another homeowner in Hove, talking about how any kind of form of alternative power is desirable, anything that gets them off coal. So you can kind of see that there's not only there's big differences between people that were in council housing and also homeowners, but also in their understanding, their engagement, and their experimentation. And interestingly, one great view that I got from a homeowner in Bevendine around the need for education is this idea it needs to happen from the ground level up. It really needs to occur locally, and that people are getting education from a young age, and they're getting the understanding around incentives to buy it. When you've got the feasibility, you've got the money to enable yourself to put these onto a property that you might own. And then the last theme is this idea of the left behind and non-adopters. And I don't think I've done this justice, because some of the themes that we've some of the groups, that we identified, such as renters, the disabled, the elderly, and students, were people that we were told are just not benefiting from this. From council tenants that have solar PV installed on their roofs, they're saying these are the groups that need to be addressed next. So I thought that was really interesting. So we had a council tenant saying the really, really super low income and people who are privately renting, anything that helps. If you're coughing up money just to keep the roof over your head, and then fixed costs like utilities, these things need to be lower. And a homeowner has touched on the problem of split incentives that we were kind of addressing earlier, which is people who are renting, their landlord is probably unlikely to put the money in to get solar panels, and it is not directly benefiting the landlord, it is benefiting the rental people. So how can we really put in policies in place that address this issue of split incentives? So, you just said I had 2 minutes left, didn't you? So I need to wrap this up. To bring together the data that we found and the kind of just transition stuff that I was talking about earlier, a just transition really needs to close the gap in access to benefits from low carbon technologies. And it's really important to engage with people on the ground to understand what a local just transition entails. So, for example, we've got a set of policy recommendations. This is just a snapshot of what we think the council could do. So increasing access to information and advice provision for the adoption of solar is really, really key. What we heard from various different participants was that the council needs to improve consistent engagement with solar households, so rather than installing the solar and leaving them to it, kind of improving communication throughout the process, throughout the 20 years that it's installed. And also simplifying and changing language, something really simple and easy to communicate, but obviously to do in practice is a very, very hard thing to do. And simplifying language around solar innovations can really help support inclusion. A lot of participants said they didn't understand what I was talking about when I would ask them fairly straightforward questions around their solar PV arrays. And lastly, it's really important to emphasize the current context that we find ourselves in and how solar can potentially help. We're in the midst of a fuel poverty crisis. The End Fuel Poverty Coalition are predicting, shockingly, that up to 8.5 million people will be in fuel poverty after the October price cap is lifted. So that's well beyond 10% of the UK population, which is a national catastrophe in my opinion. And in the context of the energy price crisis in Ukraine, energy security and independence are increasing support for much more rapid deployment of renewables. We have our first official government target for solar capacity deployment by 2030, which is trebling the amount of capacity we have today by 2030. And lastly, I really want to emphasize that I'm a big fan of community energy. I did my PhD on community energy. I'd love to see more community energy organizations proliferate and help to solve the issue of fuel poverty and tackle fuel poverty. But I also maybe want to emphasize more the importance of government intervention, and particularly local government intervention, to help reduce social inequalities. And I think with the right support, solar PV distribution can play a key role in lowering energy bills and also in delivering a just transition. And as I said, a quick plug for the local Green New Deal project that we've got ongoing in the University of Sussex, finishing 2023. We're looking at a kind of pathway for equitable COVID-19 recovery. 4 things we're looking at are framing of local economic recovery packages, value mapping of local social and environmental values, and we're going to develop a set of metrics and criteria for assessing projects that are part of Green New Deal recovery packages, and also develop a case for public capital investment in beneficial options. So thanks for giving me that time for the plug, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Max. It's hard to kick someone off the stage when they're plugging your own project. But it's a great pleasure to invite the final speaker for today's conference, and it's Councillor Cyril Hugh-Jones, who is a councillor for the Green Party in Brighton since 2019, and she's also the lead councillor for Housing Committee, and they're responsible for major works, maintenance and repairs, and I know she has a particular interest in retrofitting and energy efficiency as well. So if you just please join the stage.
The co-chair of the Housing Committee, so there are two of us, but there's only one of me here. And Max started by explaining his name. I'm going to explain mine because Cyril's quite unusual. And so for those who are wondering, it's Welsh and it means cheerful. So I try to be, in spite of the sort of these times we're living in. Anyway, it's been an inspiring conference today, and I know that there's a lot that I need to catch up on. I'm honoured to have been asked to make the concluding remarks, and I'd like to start by thanking all the speakers, everyone attending today, both online and in person, and of course the SOLARISE team and the Brighton and Hove staff for organising the event. Today we've heard about a range of SOLARISE projects, developing living labs and new teaching resources to educate the next generation of solar engineers and innovators, different ways of funding large solar projects on public buildings, maximising the benefit of renewable energy for residents on low incomes, the just transition we've just heard about, and innovation in finding solutions to solar energy in historic buildings. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Brighton and Hove and SOLARISE. Here in Brighton, we're keen to celebrate and learn from the achievements of the 4-year SOLARISE project. We're also trying to implement the just transition that Max has been speaking about. In Brighton, a former housing office has been transformed into 10 energy-efficient homes, providing temporary accommodation for people in housing need. Solar panels on the roof now provide renewable energy for 6 of the flats, while the remaining 4 benefit from air source heat pumps. The property was the first council housing project in the city where solar panels feed directly into flats rather than communal electricity supplies in the national grid. This means the solar panels directly benefit tenants by reducing their energy bills. Likewise, at one of our seniors' housing schemes, solar panels have been installed to help run heating and hot water for residents. This has led to a reduction of 8.88 tonnes of carbon emissions, as well as a reduction in residents' energy bills. Tenants at a development of new flats have also been able to reap the rewards of renewable energy thanks to solar panels installed on the roof of the building. Monitoring at the end of December showed that residents were saving around 35% on the unit cost of their electricity bills. And I know you've already heard about the new development of 42 homes in Victoria Road. We look forward to applying what we've learned throughout the SOLARISE project as we continue to offer solar panels to more council tenants across the city. And yes, I agree with the council tenant that Max referred to. We really need all our council tenants to benefit from solar. So more widely, renewable energy is key to Brighton and Hove City Council's carbon neutral target. In 2018, the Council committed to tackling the climate and biodiversity emergency by becoming carbon neutral by 2030. That remains one of our key priorities. Of course, it's an ambitious task, particularly when nationally the target date is 2050. So we need urgent action to reduce carbon emissions from transport, housing, waste, energy and water, and our natural environment. And a key focus of this is renewable energy. So I'd like to celebrate some of the Council's achievements so far. As Max referred to, we've fitted solar on some of our own social housing, and we're planning to ramp up delivery in 2022-23 with an installation of 1,500 solar PV arrays over the next 3 years, and the ambition of at least 2,500 installations by 2026 compared with where we are now. We're also part of a wider group of local authorities that are co-funding the work of the Greater Brighton City Region Retrofit Task Force into how we ensure the city region's homes and buildings are fit for a zero carbon future. This work is being overseen by Lewes District Council and led by the University of Brighton. A key objective of the task force is to outline how public sector home and building improvements can take place on a mass scale across the region, while at the same time identifying opportunities to boost new skills, create good jobs, and drive investment in low-carbon industries. We've adopted a new build housing sustainability policy, under which all our new council-built projects are required to meet the Royal Institute of British Architects 2030 Climate Challenge targets. We will shortly be replacing inefficient, expensive electric heating and hot water heaters with air source heat pumps. We've completed an appraisal for low/zero carbon heating at some of our council blocks, which could lead to 265 flats moving from gas to air source heat pumps over the next 2 to 3 years, with over 100 air source heat pumps planned for installation in 2022-23. We're introducing stronger planning requirements for renewable energy on new private housing and non-residential developments. We're auditing our council offices and commercial portfolio for energy efficiency measures and potential for renewable energy. We're part of Solar Together. This is a solar PV group purchasing scheme for homeowners promoted by local authorities. And a key part of this is the lessons we learn along the way. The second year we ran this scheme, we switched to a more local provider with knock-on benefits for customers and the development of more local skills. To date, over 200 households have accepted the offer of solar PV in Brighton and Hove. A key part of the mix are, of course, the local community energy groups, and I can see some of them here today, and we're working with them to support the rollout of solar energy projects. On EV charge points, from perhaps a slightly slow start under a previous administration, the city is now 5th in the UK for progress on installing on-street EV charge points for the public and for taxis. We're engaging local businesses to switch to electric cargo bikes for deliveries of goods and services. And incidentally, at the Eurocities conference last year, which it was my privilege to attend, Prague was shortlisted in the zero pollution category for just such a scheme. And we're also bringing in 2 all-electric refuse lorries in 2021. Sorry, we have brought them in, with a further 2 on order, and close to my heart as co-chair of Housing Committee, we're moving our housing repairs fleet over to electric vehicles. So why are we doing this? Renewable energy has never been so important to our residents. The climate and biodiversity emergency is interlinked with the everyday concerns of people in the city, from the cost of energy, food and travel, to clean air and the power of nature to improve well-being. But never has it seemed quite so immediate to residents as it does now as we face a cost of living crisis. While countries such as France have chosen to shield their citizens from the rising fuel prices, in the UK we've already seen the energy price cap increase by an average of 54%, and it's only going to get worse in October, with a 153% increase anticipated compared with October 21. Renewable energy is one of the best ways of tackling those concerns. It provides a sustainable energy supply, reduces fuel bills, improves health thanks to improved air quality as people switch to electric heating and electric vehicles. And Sustainable Development Goal 7 is affordable clean energy to ensure affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. If we're going to come anywhere near keeping to 1.5 degrees warming over pre-industrial levels, we need action on modern renewable energy now, especially in the heating and transport sectors, as the 2021 Sustainable Development Goals report has made clear. Action by governments is long overdue. Indeed, the UK government, which was so keen to boast of its climate commitments at COP26, is now pushing to rebrand natural gas as a green investment. COP26 seems a long time ago. Fortunately, in the meantime, SOLARISE and other international projects like it have been showing us the way. My hope is that this collaboration can continue. Our future depends on it. Sorry. Thank you for being part of it.
Right, so I think both Max and Serial did an excellent job of unpacking some of the really vast divides that we see in different types of residents and the differences that might explain partially of how they perceive solar investments and what role actually digital transformations play in their lives. Well, Serial did a very good job of describing some of the very hard-earned wins that Brighton and Hove City Council has had and some of the difficulties that come with these. So I just want to check whether there are any immediate questions in the room and whether we have any questions online. Anyone has the microphone? Okay. In which case, I would like to ask a question about what is it that we need in the next 5 years in a place like Brighton and Hove in order to make sure that we turn some of the very valuable lessons that we have discussed today around just transition into business as usual. How do we make these part and parcel of the work that the local council does, the great work that energy cooperatives like BESCO do?
Okay, well, to start with, I think we need more engagement with the wider community about the need for solar. I mean, obviously, we're already working on the Solar Together programme, but we need a much wider take-up of that. I think we need more from national government. I think we need a more a clearer long-term commitment to renewable energy, because one of the problems over recent years has been there have been several failed schemes, and to my mind, one of the reasons behind that has been government has been too willing to pull schemes rather than commit to them for the long term, and that means that the industry hasn't developed because people don't see the point. I mean, we've got to have that sustained investment in the sector, and as a council, we're doing that to the extent that we can. We're creating reserves. We're putting money towards this work. But it would be good to see national government as well really sending a clear message. It always seems to be, there always seem to be too many mixed messages, and it always seems to be renewables that are the poor relation when it comes to national policy. Does that go some way to answering your question?
Yeah,
I mean,
and it chimes in with what was discussed earlier in today. Max, do you have any views?
Yeah, I think in my own research, I've just got a fellowship recently to look at the role of community wealth building in the green economy and the low carbon transition. And I think in the absence of national government intervention, kind of tapping into complementary policy strategies is really important. And I know that Brighton and Hove are a community wealth building council. There's proliferating across the country. You've got a Community Wealth Building Act being debated in the Scottish Parliament. The Welsh Government are considering it at the national level. Community wealth building is a really promising local government policy movement. And how much that can be used to kind of help support some of the activity that's going on around renewables, energy efficiency, low carbon transport, I think is a great thing to explore in the next 5 years, hence why I'm doing it. Yeah.
Thank you. I can see that there is a clear call for making, just transition, not only a part and parcel of business as usual, but also making it more visible. So how do you think this could actually happen? Cyril, in your own work, how do you think we can make the just transition element of what solar projects like SOLARISE can deliver for residents? How do we make it more visible?
I mean, one of the things that has really impressed me about the SOLARISE project is the engagement with residents. And I think that that's a very necessary step, a way of sort of reassuring residents about the degree of disruption that's going to be involved that might be involved in some projects, and not just solar, but retrofitting more widely. So I think that some of it is just that sort of ground level engagement with residents, and then some residents telling other residents. Or there was one scheme that I heard about where you had sort of some residents who were champions for the scheme, who basically talked to their neighbours about the benefits of a scheme. And I think we should be exploring things like that, real grassroots, not just relying on our sort of council communications, because I mean we can always improve council communications, but that's not the only thing. And I think also, as I touched on earlier, it's a question of making those links with local providers, local businesses. Obviously, we've got BESCO here, and really making this about partnership and all working together.
Great, thank you. Max, what do you think can be done in order to make the just transition not only concept but way of working a lot more visible? If you imagine the kind of people you talk to during your study, what do you think would have made a difference to them?
Well, firstly, I'd like to criticise the UK government for doing absolutely, I don't want to swear, but nothing around this. Scotland have a Just Transition Commission. Wales are proposing a climate justice advisory group. There's various different local government schemes. And I know I'm talking from the top down here and not really answering your question, but I think if you take a multi-level governance perspective and you look at the various different levels of governance, local, regional, devolved, national, all levels need to be involved in just transition activities, strategies, and in terms of connecting with local communities, building on what was just said here by Cyril, intermediaries and networks is something that I took away from my PhD and lots of my experience working in policy. Intermediary organizations can range from information and advice services, local government, and community energy organizations, and local energy networks, advice networks, just strengthening them, ensuring that they're able to get out into the local community and talk about just transitions and have a strategy, a framework that they can refer to, that people can connect to.
Great, thank you very much. So we have heard this afternoon a lot of common themes. We have heard about tenacity and how important it is to keep banging on closed doors until they open. We heard about the importance of cooperation, and most importantly, it became really clear that none of us in the room is off the hook, nor people on Zoom. It seems that there are big roles for national government to step up. There is potentially a very big role for regional type of intermediaries like the Net Zero Hub. There is a huge expectation and responsibility and also hope of different types of residents and stakeholders that local authorities will be able to do a lot more. And I think what we have seen is also that there is role for researchers and universities also to follow what's happening with interest and help where we can, particularly to make things more transparent and help move towards business models which are about business as usual rather than just new things and pilots that we're trialing. So with that in mind, I do hope that just like myself, you leave today quite inspired, energized, pun intended, despite of the lack of natural sun today in this room. And I do hope that we get to meet soon, whether it's under the guise of another project or another discussion about how we can make most of these things happen. And most of all, I wish you all the best of luck in taking these learnings forward and in making it home on time. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.